So I was asked to speak about my research on manure separation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done over the last 3 years. But a little bit as far as Ag Solutions, this was something unique to Mercer County. When Grand Lake St. Mary's had a massive algal bloom in 2010, a group of farmers came together and said, hey, we need to work together to find effective, affordable solutions in agriculture to really combat the issues that we have in Mercer County and in particular the Grand Lake St. Mary's watershed. So they were very faithful in their efforts for 5 years or so, and then as a lot of grassroots efforts do, participation fell off, and the county commissioners undertook the Ag Solutions effort and hired a coordinator about 3 years ago. So that's when I started in this role. My background, I've been with the county for almost 13 years with the Soil and Water Conservation District. So now I'm doing this Ag Solutions thing. So one of my primary focuses has been on liquid manure. So we've got a lot of small dairy and swine facilities, and how can we better manage the nutrients coming off those liquid systems? In Mercer County, our average soil test phosphorus level is 75, and according to Tri-State, currently around 50 is the highest level we'd ever want to be at for agronomic purposes. We don't need phosphorus anymore after that 50 parts per million. So what do? We've obviously got an issue. We've got a legacy issue going on. We have a lot of manure produced, 1.8 million tons in Mercer County each year. So how can we handle that in an environmentally friendly manner and economically, and maybe get some of those nutrients further away? We see what we can do with poultry manure, and we've been doing that for the last 10 to 15 years. How can we possibly make that affordable and effective in liquid systems? So before I talk about any of these specific technologies, we need to think about each individual technology and what do we want out of it. All these technologies work depending on what you want out of it, and they're all going to have their own degrees of success. So what end products do we want? Do we want two liquid streams? Do we want a solid and a liquid? How much are you willing to spend? That's typically the biggest cost. So we got to look at both the capital expenditures and the operating cost of these systems. So first and foremost, this was one of the very first pilot projects done in Mercer County with a GEA Centrifuge. And we achieved really good results, and I'm going to show you those here in a second. You can see the pictures here. We've got really good dry material coming off of the centrifuge. And I know this is a lot of data to take in, but across the bottom, I've pointed out our phosphorus removals into the solids fraction of the manure. So the first three trials were with no polymers, no chemicals, no coagulants, just the centrifuge operating. And we were able to achieve around 70% phosphorus recovery into the solids fraction. Then we did varying rates of different polymers and coagulants, and we were able to get 100% of the phosphorus sequestered into the solids. Okay, so that brings us, okay, this works really well. What's the limiting factors? From what I've heard, some of the installations, these can be a maintenance nightmare. Certainly I don't want to recommend something to a producer and make a huge capital investment if it's not going to work. If you're going to be a year or two in and you've got maintenance issues out the wazoo and you're paying a lot of money to get the thing to operate. You know, it's kind of like a washing machine. It's spinning and pushing those solids out towards the outside of the machine. So it's got to stay in balance. That's very important. The capital cost is pretty high. You're looking at $250,000 for a 25-gallon per minute machine. Granted, that may come down over time, but that's where it's at currently. We also have to consider the additional investment for infrastructure needed to house the building and the solids. Operating cost is about 0.6 of a penny per gallon without any chemicals, so really the operation of it isn't bad without considering the maintenance issues that you may have in the future. So that's one thing we looked at. We kind of set that to the side because it may not be affordable for our small producers. Then we looked at digested organics. They have a full-scale installation in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. It's on a dairy farm with 650 head of cattle, and it's unique. This system requires no chemicals, and they're taking the manure, first putting it through a small anaerobic digester with a 5-day residence time, and then pushing it through this machine here, which is called an ultrafiltration device. And what it does is it separates out solids into a liquid, it separates your nutrients into a liquid fraction, and then you're left with a tea water that contains probably 60% of the nitrogen and a lot of your potassium. So in the end, you still have 2 liquid products. But we achieved really good results with this, and again, no chemical usage, which is a benefit. About 35 to 40% of the nitrogen was sequestered into the one liquid stream, along with up to almost 100% of the phosphorus into that one liquid stream. It's extremely expensive. We priced different ideas, if we had an on-farm installation of just the ultrafiltration, or if we had a mobile system that could go from farm to farm. You can see the cost up there. It's pretty pricey, a big investment. And then we're still left with 2 liquid waste streams. So in Mercer County, I don't know that it's all that advantageous because there's a lot of expense in hauling water. So how do we justify that? I'm not sure that it's beneficial for us. And the operating cost is pretty pricey, and that's simply electricity cost. It's pulling a lot of electricity to run that ultrafiltration device. The unique thing about this, too, and what they're doing up in Sheboygan Falls is they're going all the way to clean water. And this is the only company that I know of that has a permit to discharge their clean water into a stream in Wisconsin. So they're taking manure and making clean water. It is possible. They are feeding their cattle the water back up at that particular facility. And they're using reverse osmosis and disinfection to do that. And again, if you looked at that, it just increases your operating cost and your capital cost. So our most recent pilot is with a machine called a KDS Separator. This is out of Japan. It's a series of rotating discs, and we add the manure to the back end, and I'm going to show you a short video of how this looks in operation. And then the solids come off the back end. The picture on the left here is swine, and in the middle is dairy. So we ran trials last March on both swine and dairy. See if I can get this to run here. Okay, so this is just a short video of it running with the swine manure. This is the solids coming off. And then the liquid, the filtrate falls into the bottom below the machine. And then you can see up top where it's slowly moving over these rotating discs. And then all the raw manure goes into this back tank where we can feed in polymers and coagulants to aid in separation. So it's very simple. It's a 10 by 10 machine. It does about 10 gallons per minute. So we were able to achieve 87% removal of phosphorus in swine manure and about 70% in dairy manure. Again, we do have to use polymers and chemicals to achieve that separation. Without the chemicals, we got a little bit of a reduction, but we were mostly just pulling out fiber solids, not a lot of the nutrients. The good thing about this is it is more affordable. It's got a very low electricity demand, so really the electricity is just a fraction of a penny per gallon. Our operating cost here comes in the chemicals. So when we did this trial, We just basically found out that, yes, it can work. This summer, we're doing a full-scale, long-term pilot on swine for sure. We're trying to work out a dairy pilot as well, where we can really optimize the use of the machine. So how cheap can we make the operating cost and maximize the efficiency? So if our target is 70% removal, how cheaply can we do that? So we're going to do lots of different scenarios and lots of testing to figure out how we can optimize the system. Like I said, about $60,000 for this particular machine, which would be big enough for most of our facilities in Mercer County. So along with this summer pilot, along with KDS, we're going to look at a secondary application, which is just to pull out more of the phosphorus. And this is called quick wash. Basically what we're doing with quick wash is you can look at adding some acid. What the acid does is forces the phosphorus into your liquid portion, and then you're going to just pull out more phosphorus. So we're going to look at adding acid and not adding acid, and then adding the lime. So by adding the lime's binding with your phosphorus, and you're going to precipitate out calcium phosphate. So maybe there's a potential that we can cheaply remove even additional phosphorus after the KDS separator. This is some data from old anaerobic swine lagoon in Ohio. Their levels were getting higher than they wanted to see. You can see they're about 1.75 pounds per 1,000 gallon, which typically you're seeing about a third of that come out of a well-functioning anaerobic lagoon. And they were able to drop that significantly just by liming the liquid coming off the top of that lagoon. I want to briefly touch on something else we piloted. So we took that effluent coming off the KDS separator last March, April, and we basically saved it. And we piloted this MORIF unit, which the MORIF unit is kind of like a dissolved air flotation device, except we're injecting ionized gases into the water, into the air, that's added to that DAF type unit. We saw some really impressive results. However, the biggest downfall we found during these trials was we never achieved a really good flock, a really good float on the top. The best we got was about 5% solids, which isn't ideal. So while we achieved some really significant reductions, 60% of the phosphorus, 80% of the 60% of the nitrogen and 80% of the phosphorus, it just, if we're after trying to get the nutrients out and make that affordable, I'm not sure that this is the answer. But that's not to say it wasn't worth trying. I think there's going to be a dairy in Mercer County that is going to play with that system a little bit more and figure out if it's going to work for them. Other technologies I've looked at, visited, and talked to people about, the livestock water recycling. It's got a pretty good installed base in the United States. Everyone I've talked to, though, has had some issues with it. It's maybe not met the capacity that they've desired, or it's just not functioned as well as they had hoped. Livestock water recycling has a really good separation system. I think their downfall may be in the reverse osmosis portion where they're going all the way to clean water. We've looked at gasification. Gasification is a great technology. It's expensive. However, in liquid manure, it's not a viable option because you'd have to spend a lot of money drying liquid manure to get it to the point where you could even put it into a gasifier. Same thing with combustion. That works more for poultry litter, and that's where it's really being used is with poultry litter. And then I know there is some heifer facilities that has a drier pen pack type manure that uses gasification. Trident Processes is a dissolved air flotation device. That's what Fair Oaks is using. They do it very cheaply there because of the high volume of manure they have coming into the facility. However, it takes a lot of equipment to get that float, which is about 8% solids, down to about a 20% solids fraction It takes a lot more equipment than you'd expect. And then I've looked a ton at bioaugmentation manure, pit additives, those sorts of things, which they may have their place for some people that need to reduce crusting or solids buildup in their pits, but environmentally, as far as reducing nutrients, we're not getting any nutrient reduction by adding those products to the pit. It may make life easier for some producers, and they may think that's worthwhile, and that's great. But nutrient-wise, it doesn't really make a difference. I wanted to briefly talk about the concept of a mobile system. So when I first started, it was like, well, let's not have a producer have to make the investment, the capital investment. What if we just put this equipment on a truck? We could roll up to the farm. We could separate their solids. How can we do that? And it's a really good concept, and this is a system out of Pennsylvania that ARS is researching called Mayfix, and it's working really well. Would be ideal for maybe some really small facilities. The biggest issue I see is capacity. So this particular system's running about 30 gallons per minute. So if you rolled up on a 1,000 or 2,000 head hog farm, you'd be there for 2 to 3 weeks to process an entire pit. So I don't know of any equipment that can allow us to go from the pit through separation out to the field. I mean, to get it through a drag line, you'd need to be somewhere to the tune of 500 to 1,000 gallons per minute. And I just don't know that there's any equipment capable of that process yet. So it's something to watch, something to still keep in mind, and definitely we're interested in. And I wanted to briefly touch on manure composting. Obviously, if you've got a semi-solid or a lot of solid manure, composting is a great alternative, great method of reducing moisture content in your manure to allow you to go further with the nutrients. It's a really nice product. This dairy producer, he's a small organic producer in Mercer County. About 75% of his manure, liquid, solids, all of it, he composts. And he has a really nice product at the end. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of space. And of course, you do have to invest in turning it because you really have to turn your piles to make it work like it needs to work. And also want to talk about anaerobic digesters. So we've had probably 5 or so companies come through Mercer County in the last 5 to 10 years and say, hey, we've got the answer. We're going to solve all your issues with an anaerobic digester. And that's great. You can make a lot of money. There's a lot of money to be made in renewable natural gas. However, a pound of phosphorus in a digester is a pound out. So every company I've talked to has said, hey, we're interested if you're interested, but we've got to have phosphorus recovery on the back end because our ultimate goal is to get nutrients away from the Grand Lake St. Mary's watershed. So that's kind of where they stop short and things kind of fall apart. And then how do we get the natural gas into the pipeline? Are we going to build a centralized facility where manure is trucked to, or are we going to pipe gas through pipelines to get it to a central facility for cleanup? There's a lot of logistic issues that come along with anaerobic digesters. But there is a lot of money to be made. Some guys have said, hey, we'll come in, we'll make all the investment. All we want is a commitment for the manure. But then it's got to be fresh, so then you're looking at putting a digester on the farm and building a bunch of pipeline. It's just, there's, like I said, so many logistic issues, and I don't know that there's any company out there that's worked through that to make something work in Mercer County. So in conclusion, these separation systems need to be simple, affordable, and effective. Our pilot coming up this summer will give us a lot more information on at least one type of system, which I think may be the most effective way to go, because if we can make it affordable enough to have that system on the farm individually and that person manage it rather than a mobile system or a centralized facility, that might be the best option. And maybe there's a chance that NRCS could help in cost share on some of these items. And I want to mention we are working on a relationship with a company to look at buying those solids. So with this pilot we've got coming on this summer, all of the solids are going to be going to this company for their research efforts and what they can do with those. And obviously we know farming is a tough business. I myself and my husband run a dairy operation, and I know how hard it is, and there's not a lot of money, extra money to do things like this. So the whole purpose of us trying to do this is to get ahead of the curve. If there's a huge change in 590 where we can no longer apply manure at a different soil test phosphorus level, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So we're trying to get ahead of the game and figure out where we need to be and what some of these answers might be. So with that, is there any comments or questions that I can answer? Nope. Clear as mud, right? As far as manure goes, nope, just the one will be going on in July for sure at Statler Farms in Macomb. And then we're going to try to tag a dairy either on the front or back end of that with KDS. There hasn't been a lot of new technologies in manure that I've seen coming up. So, and obviously this is just one piece of the puzzle. There's many other things that need to happen along with this on the land. So, thank you.